Hello, everyone. It's Cal Gould again here, doing another presentation on history of ball hockey. And this particular individual we have here with us today certainly has early roots in the sport in the city of Edmonton. So let's find out who we're talking to. What is your name and where are you from?
Henry Federici, Edmonton.
Thanks for joining us today. What I'd like to ask you is, what are some of your early memories playing the unorganized sport of ball hockey or street hockey? Like in your youth, what was it? What do you remember?
We used to have like teams, like it could be 3 teams or 4 teams. When you're in junior high or even elementary school, you're playing street hockey. But in your head, there is always desire to play somebody else. You see, you may have an organized team or it's like a pickup style, but you're always asking yourself, what about the people who live in another community? If you ever drive by and you see people playing street hockey, 4, 5, 6 of them, say, hey, we can take, let's have a game against each other. Never mind that. It's also the networking, new friends, whatever. And that was very, very difficult. You could play people within, let's say, a couple of schools that were close together that you knew from baseball, soccer, or ice hockey and have a game. But unbeknownst to us of the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association, just in an area or a couple of communities, you always want that. And so you would sometimes play in a parking lot or else in a ice hockey rink in the summertime. That happened. Anyways, years later, we found out in Glenora that there was like 4 and 6 team leagues playing in a tarmac at Westminster, and that was the ideal thing. It gave you happiness and satisfaction, especially during the winter when there was a layer of snow or ice on the parking lot, and if you fell, it was no big deal. That is what it was like. Ultimately, even when I remember in grade 9, we wanted to play players from another school, but it just couldn't be arranged. So you always want to see how good you are compared to others, and that's what eventually led to the formation of the Capital City Ball Hockey Association. At that time, first year, Edmonton Ball Hockey League affiliate.
Did you play other organized sports before becoming involved in the ball hockey?
Yes. A couple of years of soccer, a year of baseball, and ice hockey.
And how exactly did you get involved in the ball hockey, ball hockey league, or any ball hockey organization? How exactly did you get involved? Were you invited? Did you have a group of friends? How exactly?
We had a group of friends from a couple of schools, and we used to play. We had like a 3-team league out in the West End, which were very, very serious. And we had a draft, and we had a selection, and we had statistics, and we kept on like this. And it went for a few years. And that was it for that, up until that part. Up until 1981, that's what it was.
Now, how old were you when you were doing this? And how old were the individuals you were playing with? Were they same age, a little older, younger? What exactly was it like?
Roughly the same age. There were some people who lived in the neighborhood that we added on, but almost all of us were, at the time, between like 15, 16, 17. And then somebody was like a year or 2 older or a year or 2 younger, just to add up, because there were times when you needed to fill up a team. You had to add some people just to have like 3 men and a goalie, and then you had to have a guy who's off who would come in and substitute for people, like a rotation. So that's what it was like. But looking back, it wasn't the games that were important. It was the friendship and camaraderie and things that you would do on other occasions or other days.
What was the name of your first team? Do you remember any names of your first team or any?
Yeah, it was there was a guy whose name was Brian Wilkins. He was the captain of the team. So it was the Wilkins Warriors. And then Louis Remedios had a team called the Parkview Patrol. And there was another team. There was the Road Rippers, who played every once in a while. There was another team. They really didn't have a name, but they were like to us, like remember at that time we had the touring Soviet teams that toured the NHL. They did something very similar. Based on the 1970s Team Canada thing, we also had like Team Canada, Team Czech Republic, Team USA, and there was another one. But that was very serious for us, because you're in grade school and elementary, and you always dream, if you can't skate on the ice, of being that prolific scorer or the prolific goalie, which I was, and I loved it. I loved it. This is the things that went through your head at that time. This is before the internet and TV video games and, places being open on Sundays. Like Sundays in Edmonton were very boring. So the next logical thing is street hockey. And during the weekend on Thursdays when we got off school at 2:15.
And what other teams might have you been involved with? Can you remember any other teams other than that one?
Nothing of any significance.
In comparison to other sports that you played, what was your impression of the ball hockey organizations that you were involved with?
I remember very well the first year of our league and how we were really pushed to get our skills together and get our timing together. Everything that you may have learned from experience or in school, like it got pushed to the test, but it was relatively quick. You couldn't say, well, we'll think about it over the weekend. No, it wasn't like that. Certain skills that we hadn't done or used for a long time, boom, all of a sudden you got to do it. When it comes to meeting with people from the city of Edmonton, you have to have an agenda and your questions ready. And then you got to make notes because sometimes you have to relay it to representatives of teams or other people. And sometimes, you want to think it out what the guy said from City of Edmonton Parks and Recreation and this and that and other teams or whatever. There were a lot of things that came together relatively quickly. I was doing marketing at the time. And there were some other people, notably Steve Posavec, which when he joined us, gave us a tremendous lift up because Steve Posavec did a lot of those little things. Another person was Ken Stevenson. He played with the West Stars and other teams, the Blitz and whatnot. But Ken just had that kind of personal ability because we were in trouble in the first year during the playoffs at Oliver Arena. And we had to have a meeting at the city of Edmonton. And Ken Stevenson took a day off work to take Louis and see Steve Posavec and deal with the city of Edmonton to rectify our situation. Otherwise, our first season was going to just blow up in front of us. I'd like to talk about that later too.
Other than being involved as a player, obviously you were, did you take on any other roles such as a coach, manager, referee, and then of course as an organizer?
Yes. Okay. So refereeing, we felt that we may have not quite got the budget right regarding referee fees and games and whatnot. So Louis and I together or separately reffed a lot of games for nothing to save the league money because we had budgeted for so much, but it appears that the expenses may exceed what we had budgeted. So in order to save some money, and we saw this, I had seen this already planning in advance. So we started doing it for no pay, whereas other referees were being paid. So that was that part for refereeing. Managing and coaching. I took over for the West Stars early in the first season because all of a sudden some people got some type of work that took them away from this or else other activities. But also at the time, the club that I was with, the West Stars, needed a common foundation and needed organization. It was an extreme pleasure to coach and manage the team for the first 2 years. That also included a recruitment of players. And everything happened so fast that you found yourself remembering certain players that you had played against in hockey or in the neighborhood or heard of, and going through the phone book and going through all of that name just to find the guy. You had an idea roughly where he lived, and you went through all of them, like in that area or close to that area, just to find like Clinton Smith. Boom. You make like 7, 8, 9 calls, and finally you get him. He had moved or something like that, but you get him. Hey, can you play ball hockey? Will you play ball hockey with us? And the other one was advertising in the paper, and that unexpectedly worked well. But it was quite an adventure.
Yeah, I want to go back to that discussion that one thing you pointed out about budgeting, being an organization that was new. It was a new organization. It's a relatively new sport. Only a couple of years was really all that it had in Edmonton, but it had only been in the country for a few years. What were some of the hurdles other than budgeting that you had to deal with? As you already mentioned, arenas with the city. What were some of those really difficult hurdles you had to deal with?
Without a doubt, was scheduling. Unlike now, or else in the second season, where the schedule was laid out at the beginning of the season, we were only planning to schedules 2-3 weeks at a time. And it was just getting people together, because like sometimes like you have like open dates, and then you got to call all these people, hey, like for teams, can you play on such and such a date? Because some teams just couldn't make it. They'd call the league and says, yeah, this day we can't make it for whatever reason, which is kind of odd. So it was difficult, and you hope that everything goes intact. But once we got a handle on it, it was absolutely beautiful, because we promoted it like a wrestling or a boxing card. We had 3 games in one night. The biggest challenge was to finish on time, because the Oliver Arena, where we played, the custodian, so to speak, was a lifeguard. And I knew him only because he was dating a girl that I went to school with in the neighborhood. And he wanted to go home at a certain time, but he may have been unaware that we had an arrangement with the city of Edmonton. And sometimes he'd walk into the arena and close the lights up, turn the lights out. I said, like, what are you doing? Another issue, the biggest issue, was the half hour before we start and the half hour after we finish. 1 year later, 2 years later, Rick Aslin fixed that, because he said to the city, well, you have to send a janitor anyway, so why are we being charged for it? But getting the janitor to open up the arena on time, sometimes it wasn't, and most of the time it was. But also it was finishing. The janitor went home, and all of a sudden the lifeguard, he was the guy who would finish up or whatever. I want to go home, because he was only being paid for a certain time, but we had the arena till about 10:30. So the fascinating thing is that we played mostly from, I think, Sunday to Thursday, except in the playoffs, we had to play Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays. But we also had Sundays. Sundays were very casual. You would have teams that were either at the bottom of the standings, or else that was the time when you had what we called squash matches, where the best team played against the weakest team. And a lot of people came in on Sunday, they just did the thing and went home. Then you had the ones during the week. Now, it is very important to understand that Alberta was in a very, very deep recession, a very deep recession. Ball hockey was a sanctuary for a lot of people, for things to do, see friends, and to participate in something, because besides the games, you also have practices that they did in parking lots or empty ice hockey rinks outdoor, and wherever they could find a place, even a gymnasium. Gymnasiums played a major part, especially during the wintertime. So during certain days, but especially Thursdays, we had 3 games that night. We had the first one, which was like a warm-up. Then maybe not even a warm-up, because like we had the top 4 teams to select from, the top 4 teams in the one division, top 4 teams in the other division, and you could create 3 games. So the first game was a good game. Second game was a great game. And the third game was the game of the week. Like everybody was serious. And what also happened is, the nice thing about it is that players, or else fans, girlfriends, whatever, from people, wives, from people that were playing, they either stayed to watch the next game, or else they were just there out of interest because their boyfriend or spouse was playing. So in the very, very tight games, we got a lot of people. And here's the other thing. I mentioned to you was recession. A lot of people were unemployed and were not working, or working very little. So on nights like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, especially on a Thursday, they were working Friday, off to the bar for drinks after, till the bar closed, which what we did at various places. Edmonton, and especially because there was a lot of room and you could park. Also the Racers Pub for us at the Mayfield Inn. And like we closed the place down because nobody had to work the next day. So we could go out drinking till late. And it was very, very enjoyable, because you would first talk about the game and how excited you were. And then the players would sit down, and many of them didn't know each other. They started talking about their personal interests or their lives or whatever. And it was, I think that if there was one thing I could say about the beginning, was that a lot of people either met people that they haven't seen in many years because they moved or relocated or they relatives, but also the contacts that people made. And I saw that in later years, how people who were in real estate or in law or whatever were networking, for services. But in the first year, especially, and also the second year, people had something to look forward to. But the hurdles, getting back to the hurdles, it was actually the city of Edmonton. And the biggest one was in July, we were in the playoffs, and there was an incident regarding 3 guys from the West Stars who followed or harassed a lifeguard as that person left to go home. And the city just shut us down. We got the phone call, we're shutting you down, you're canceled. So Ken Stevenson had to get Steve Posavec, Louis Remedios, go down to the city. We had to put up a bond. Plus the usual apologizing, and we had to guarantee that we would behave. The other biggest challenge, I almost forgot, was referees. Sometimes Louis or myself or other people, Steve Posavec, Chris Smith, Mark Dufresne, Ken Stevenson, although they got paid, were pressed into service because we had no referees. And the worst one, no timekeepers. Oh, like you had to persuade somebody who was a fan of so-and-so to be a timekeeper. And later we had to pay timekeepers. But like we had Matt Thompson's girlfriend and her friend as our timekeepers. They didn't want to be timekeepers and jot everything down, and the penalties and the scoring and whatever. They didn't want to do that. But you say, please, we need your help. I think that looking back, there was, we were saved by the fact that John Posavec, Steve's younger brother, would do a lot of it. See, remember, he was still in elementary, maybe junior high. He had nothing else to do anyway. He wasn't working. He did that work, which saved us. But that was the biggest scare. The other thing, anything having to do with the city of Edmonton interfering, like the lifeguard who decided just to shut the lights off. Oh, you guys are done, whatever. We're tie game, 10 minutes late. And we got the arena booked till, I think it was 10:30. Well, he says, well, I'm off at 9:30. I got to go. No, you're not. And then we would have to complain to the city and everything got straightened out. But let's say that the first year was kind of like a raft boat on the Colorado River, up and down. But it was fun. That's what made it so exciting. A lot of things you didn't know. So the scheduling was usually about 2 or 3 weeks in advance. And when it came to the playoffs, it was like 1 week in advance because a lot of it was if necessary. And if you booked the time and a series was over quickly, then you had to start the next round for one group of teams a little bit early. Here's another thing. A lot of people didn't want to play on long weekends. So I remember once at the time they were the Southside Raiders. There was a guy named Mohan Thind. He said, Louis, we play 3 games in 4 nights, which was unheard of. And he said, looked at him and said, yeah, but remember, you wanted that July or June, whatever, that May long weekend off. You're playing for it now, whatever. So, and on long weekends, here's something else. Get a load of this. A lot of players who had jobs or whatever, had holidays. Now, maybe they can't fly somewhere, but they could go to Jasper or to the lake or whatever. And when the playoffs rolled around in end of July and August, there were certain players who would tell their captain. I remember once with the Wizards, the Crawford brothers. One of their players was saying, my girlfriend and I are going to the lake on the weekend. He said, no, you're not. We got a game on Friday night or whatever. We need you here. So a lot of people had to adjust their holidays or summarize their holidays or make alternative arrangements or convince their girlfriend, well, we'll go later, something like that. But as a league, we tried to do something for them because it would be awful if you had a playoff game and only 9 players showed up and it would be a wipeout or else the series would turn based on a bad game. We tried. It was very difficult because we had a deadline, and the fact that we were shut down for, if I remember, it was somewhere between 4 to 7 days in July by the city till we got that rectified. I think it was at least 4 days. we all of a sudden have to cram games, and we had to run. We were forced, if I remember correctly, we had to run 3 games on a Saturday and 3 games on a Sunday to make up for that, like during the day and whatever. It was very difficult, but we made it. And a lot of people had to make a lot of sacrifices. I remember there was a player from the Wizards. I'll never forget it. I was refereeing their playoff game, and he vomited on the bench, and they were going into overtime. He vomited on the bench. He finished, and then he went back out and played. So, like, the challenges most of the time were the city. Here's another one I forgot: jerseys and numbers. In the first year, sometimes people had the same number, so they had a, or else they came with the same right sweater but no number. So you saw a lot of tape, like masking tape, whatever, and white hockey stick tape, 1, 11, 2, and other simple numbers on the back of the, or 6, like this. Well, it's like this for you, like this. But, 1 and 11, they were common numbers, 1 and 11, because it's easy. Or 9 or 7. 7 was the other number, because I remember, it's from your point of view, it's like this and like this, right? So it was, those are the biggest challenges. Referees, getting referees. A lot of games were refereed by one referee who couldn't see everything. Numbers, scheduling, city. That's pretty well it. But that encompasses a lot.
It was a lot. So my question also that I would like to ask, because I heard you say quite a few times we, can you tell me, like, what was the structure, or how many people were in the the organizers, the executive of the league, like, and who is what? Can you give me a little bit about the hierarchy? Like, who was the president, or who was at the top, and how many were there to help?
Year 1, Louis Remedios president, myself, Henry Federici vice president and treasurer. Steve Posavec was another person. He was more or less in charge of operations and statistics. We had contributions from Chris Smith, Ken Stevenson, and Mark Dufresne. So they would attend meetings, and they would, have certain roles, but it was more or less undefined. They just helped out wherever they could. In the second year, it became Andre May president. What the hell was I? I believe I was still vice president. And there was Ken Stevenson was involved. Steve Posavec was involved. And Steve Posavec, I think was, Steve Posavec was vice president. I was doing other work. I was not treasurer. Somebody else was doing that. So aside from 3 positions, like Steve Posavec was president, did scheduling. The other people had undefined roles, but they were there helping out, doing various things. It could be arranging for the scheduling with the city, making payments, making the nets, make sure the nets are there, the referees, having to deal with the referees. In the second year, I was doing a lot less, because the biggest challenge facing us as organizers and also players is they start growing up. There were many players who were older, 3, 4, 5 years older than us. They're now either serious dating, they're getting married, or they have kids, and their time is getting less and less. There was a gentleman by the name of John Simonetto a few years later who took a lot on his back and spent a lot of time. It was his work, home life, and then ball hockey. So work and ball hockey were almost the same amount of hours, and home life was limited, let's say. We'll be very polite and say it was limited. And it was unbelievable. The other one was Rick Aslin. Year 3, we had Rick Aslin. And the biggest contribution to having Rick Aslin there was he brought a lot of exuberance and confidence, but he brought a lot of class. But he had a lot of experience, many, many years in the community of Elmwood about their executive and ice hockey for the kids and soccer and whatever. And he was the one that decided to, first of all, have all the executive wear jackets. And instead of having meetings, we had meetings in restaurants. The first 2 years, we had meetings at Franklin's and other restaurants like the what the hell was it called? Looney's. It was the place on 149th Street and Stony Plain Road. Goonies. At Goonies, we had meetings at Goonies, and but Franklin's was a popular place. we arranged to have it at the Coronation Arena, at the meeting room at Coronation Arena. It was free. And then the other thing was when you had your meetings. Sometimes it was a meeting whenever. We got to have a meeting. With Rick Aslin, once we got together, we were having meetings every other week. No less than once a month, maybe every 3 weeks, but we had meetings at least once a month at the Coronation Arena. So that was another thing to happen. But to answer your question, first year there was like maybe 4 or 5 of us. Like core was 3: Louis, myself, Steve Posavec. The second year there was Andre May, Steve Posavec, myself, Louis Remedios, who was vice president, and there was a few others, Ken Stevens, others who worked from time to time. I am missing somebody. I can't remember who it is, but I am missing somebody.
Martin Moy?
Yes. Already in the second year, Martin Moy was already helping out. He was an executive in year 3, 1984, but he was already I think he took the baton from Chris Smith because he was dealing with his team, and he was also, I think, working or whatever. He helped. He made his presence known already in 1983. There were some people who we didn't hear from very much, but would come forward and help out or say things or make suggestions, which were very helpful. They may not participate in meetings, but they have a sheet of paper with some suggestions. Mohan Thind from the Blitz was another one. There were a few other ones, but those were probably the key people. Again, a guy like Mohan Thind may not have been very often, but he would come forward and say things, hey, here's some suggestions. We should do this or that.
Some of our viewers here, they're getting a better understanding now of how the inner workings of a league goes. But maybe one question somebody might ask is, how does a person get involved with the league as an organizer? Do they get appointed? Do they get voted in? Do they just join in? How exactly did some of these people become involved?
In the very, very beginning, people would either say, I want to help out, I want to get involved. That's how Steve Posavec got in. And Steve Posavec did a lot of the statistical work, plus he did the newsletter. We had a newsletter. I'm not sure the EBHA had a newsletter. We were up against some stiff competition because we looked at their league in awe, not knowing what the reality was behind the scenes regarding losing money and other things. Steve Posavec, I think there were times when he was doing almost half the work, but again, he was going to school, he had the summers off, his employment was limited, but he did it with a lot of zest and fervor, like a lot of enthusiasm and interest in the newsletter and statistics and anything else, like timekeeping. He spent a lot of time timekeeping, scorekeeper, if you will, in the arenas. And he loved it. That was he had a lot of passion. And when later on, when Steve Posavec and Rick Aslin and Martin Moy, they were very, very passionate, especially Rick Aslin and Steve Posavec, which really leaped over the other league. And we also had in 1984, with a government-sponsored project, which Louis Remedios organized, we were broadcasting ball hockey. And we provided standings, and we also showed some of their games on television as well. How do they get? I don't know what it is like today, but back then in the second year, there were elections. And I think in the third year, that's when the elections started a lot. But some people didn't want to be president. So, whoever steps forward and wants to do it, did it. Other positions, as time went on, to say, hey, I'm an accountant, I'm a bookkeeper, I can help you out regarding your treasury department. And they came forward. Or else the third thing is that we asked people that we knew. Like they were the type of people that would stay behind after the game or at the beginning and come up with suggestions or comments or criticisms. And we said, hey, this guy seems to be very active. We should ask him to find a spot for him on the board. And like a lot of people, when they realized how much time was important, like the meetings to be part of the league, they couldn't handle that. So they would be limited to just providing suggestions or criticisms. But a lot of the people who came onto the board, they put in a lot of hours. There was a huge sacrifice. Rick Aslin and Steve Posavec put in a ton of hours. And Rick Aslin had a family. He had two boys, Trevor and Tom, and he had a job with the bus, ETS, and yet he managed to fit it in. Rick Aslin said the story once. He said, this is back in 84. He said, last year I had a thin briefcase. Now I've got two of those, those briefcases that you open up at the top with the strap that goes across, open it up. I got two briefcases, files, an elastic with pencils and markers in between, and empty pieces of paper, and notes and everything, and erasers and glue and stapler, all in two materials in two briefcases, because that's what it took. And I think that answers the question about how people got involved, because I've covered the part about elections, volunteer, or else they came forward and then they were brought in.
The Capital City Ball Hockey Association actually became incorporated just prior to the 1984 season. Do you recall who actually went in and filed for that? Because that's an association you have to file as a nonprofit organization. Basically, that was the turning point and probably the greatest individual step the whole entire Ball Hockey League made in the city. Do you recall who it was that made that initial application?
Yeah, it was the first year we went under Edmonton Ball Hockey League affiliate. The purpose is that I should go back to the history here. In September 81, Mark Dufresne was pushing very, very hard for us to get involved or get a team in the Edmonton Ball Hockey League. We applied to get into the Edmonton Ball Hockey League, and we were told our league is full. We have all the teams. And if you came in, you would not be playing the Nordiques. You would be in the bottom division and have to work your way up. It would take several years. So he also said, why don't you go start your own league? We were hoping, very much like American football leagues, to be absorbed by the big one somewhere down the road. Hence the name Edmonton Ball Hockey League affiliate. In the second year, when Rick Aslin started coaching, he was brought in, he was asked to coach the Ballers, who were the succession to the Awesome O's. He brought that up regarding that the name. He said it doesn't fit because we're not our own entity. So if my memory serves me correct, it was Steve Posavec who came up with that idea. So what happened was that we used that name in 1983. That was the name that we used. And it carried forward, but we had no idea how important that would have been until 1984. Well, we already had the jackets that we had in 1983, but what happened was by 1984, we were doing things very, very well. On a level of awareness, EBHA was still ahead of us, Edmonton Ball Hockey League, because they had presence in the provincials and nationals. But organizational wise, we were already passing them because we were already on TV. That was our idea. We had established a trophy system, and instead of trophy, it was rings. We had championship rings, which no one else had, and we were also financially flush. We had, thanks to Rick Aslin, we had the Shakers Acres promotion, and we were cash flush. When we ended up our first year, despite all the troubles and all the problems, we had money left over. And then we went into the next year, we had to increase our budget, but we were not losing money. We were still ahead, which was wonderful. And as time went on, the Edmonton Ball Hockey League had all kinds of problems regarding who was running the league and losing money. And I'm told by other people they started losing significant money, yet we were flush. We did TV broadcasting work, and our awareness was growing. But I think my opinion was that we didn't have tons of teams. We had a relatively stable league with a certain amount of teams, that we didn't overexpand or overdo everything. Years later, we got women, and then we got teenagers, and then we got kids, which I wish I was part of. I wish we had it when were kids, to play ball hockey like that, because you make a lot of new friends and it's fun and exciting. But those were things that actually came together that were to our advantage. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You certainly did. You led right into what I was going to ask you about, the benefits of being in, because there was an unofficial rivalry between the two leagues, Edmonton Ball Hockey Association and Capital City Ball Hockey Association. There was no question that the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association produced a significantly effective, or I should just say competitive teams that did well at provincials and nationals, leaving Capital City Ball Hockey Association trying to build up stronger competitive teams. But there were benefits that the Capital City Ball Hockey Association offered that drew teams and players. Sometimes teams right from the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association were drawn over. Other than the trophies and the rings, there were some other benefits. Do you recall what some of those great benefits were?
I had a conversation with Steve Posavec about that a few years later. It was already in the 1990s. And he told me was that the Capital City Ball Hockey Association, to the people that came over, there was something that they really liked, either because it was better organized. I think what it was they had a better opportunity to win the championship. If you are in the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association for years and you're in a ladder system or like a caste system, your chance of getting to the finals, to Alberta Ball Hockey Championships, are slim, and it's a long haul. You're in 4th division, no. But if you were a team of the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association, you came to the Capital City Ball Hockey Association, you had an equal opportunity to everybody to make it to the provincials. You had an equal opportunity out of 13 or 16 or 20 teams. You had every single opportunity to get to the provincials, and you could really start to build your team against the best in like the Emperors, to stack yourself up against the Emperors, because that was going to be your opportunity and your ticket to the provincials, which we finally did in 1984. We did it in 1984. And that, again, was thanks to Steve Posavec, but especially Rick Aslin. The Alberta Ball Hockey Association said, well, you got to pay a fee. Now, here's a very critical part of this story. For many, many years, it was the Nordiques, and before that, Beverly Bruins, and always the Playboys. So they had a direct route to the provincial ball hockey championships. When the Capital City Ball Hockey Association were granted an opportunity because they paid fees, I think it was Ron Durenboss said, oh, well, you got to play the second team of the Edmonton Ball Hockey Association. And Rick Aslin said no. He was ready to go to the Canadian Ball Hockey Association. He said, no way. If we're paying a fee to be part of the Alberta Ball Hockey Association, then we are granted a spot in the provincials. So this upset the Playboys, because they said, well, these guys are the boys from down the street. We can annihilate them, and we should have the right to be in the provincial because we're the better team. And because Rick Aslin was so assertive, I don't know what he did in the back room. Maybe Steve Posavec would know, but he made a very strong and assertive point. If we pay a fee to the Alberta Ball Hockey Association, then we are entitled a right to be in the provincials. No matter how well or poorly we perform, we have that right. And so when that happened, a lot of players, but also teams, or let's say there's a word for it, functions, or a group, rogue unit, whatever, factions of certain teams in 2nd division or 3rd division. They would get some people together and they would form a team in the Capital City Ball Hockey Association because they had an equal opportunity to get to the Alberta Provincial Championships. They didn't have to wait 2, 3, 4 years like in the English Soccer League. In their divisions, you had to move up. You had to finish in the top 2, and then you move up. And there were some teams that didn't want to move up, but you moved up, and then you got into the Premier Division. It didn't work that way in our league. It was fair to everyone. Everyone had a shot to go to the provincials. And once they caught on to that, then the talent in the Capital City Ball Hockey Association rose dramatically. The style of play rose. The game, the talent rose. Like, it wasn't people that you know from the bar or from the card club or from playing, whatever, tennis or lacrosse or whatever. It wasn't just anyone or your brother-in-law, or your cousin, or that guy, or your friend from down the block. They started hunting for talented players. And the Emperors had the advantage of Roy Podolsky, Perry Berzan, who played with the Calgary Flames, and people like that. They had incredible talent. And like, it just blossomed. And it was years later when I came back to see the league, it was a pleasure watching it. It really was. It had changed dramatically.
So for the viewers to understand the implications here of the provincials back in that era, generally it was one city, one representative. So Lethbridge would have a representative, Fort McMurray, and Calgary, being the same size as Edmonton, still only had one representative because there was only one league, whereas Edmonton had the two leagues, and this is where that whole issue arose. So let's talk about provincials. There were teams that went from different cities all over there. Who do you see? How did you see the teams' representation at the provincials in the first part of? You already mentioned it earlier, and then how did you see it sort of change over time as the growth of the sport occurred?
I was told, maybe I stand corrected, but I was told that Edmonton had two teams, the Playboys and the Nordiques, who every year went. When we came in, got paid membership, became a member, we went. So it was the Nordiques, and usually in the beginning, it was the Emperors every year. Each team could pick up a few players, 2 players, I believe. The Emperors in the first year played Calgary, and they had a nice lead, and they blew it. And it's like you lost 2 games, all the gas was out. But what I remember, 1984 was played at Jasper Place Arena. And you watch teams that have been around for a while, like the team from Calgary and the Nordiques. And you're standing in tall cotton. That's the best way to say it. You know that in Carolina. You're standing in tall cotton because the Nordiques and that team from Calgary were far superior to what we were. And we realized at the time, we have to catch up a lot. It's no longer a case that in the first few years of the league, you find all kinds of players, but it's also people just to fill positions, to get numbers. Now, you all of a sudden have to create a bar where a person is either higher or lower. If he's under the bar, you may not be able to put him on your team. He has to go play in another league or for another team. Your talent all of a sudden has to be considerably levels higher. If you are going to have a chance to win games at the provincials and go far, you had to add a lot more talent. And when you were able to select 2 players to your team for the provincials, you had to think about it very carefully. It couldn't be your buddy or the guy that you knew or whatever, even if you didn't like him, even if he was with a rival like Ian Ferguson, who was added by the Emperors. They may not have liked him, but at the time he was the best goalie in the league, and you had to call or ask him to play.